What's up? Welcome in. Hoge and Jahns with you, inching towards the Bears' first preseason game. And our old friend Matt Nagy.
He's back.
Coming back to town.
It's got to be weird for him, but quarterback's coach, whatever. The revenge factor is minimal.
I feel like the NFL is just messing with some of these teams with their first. The Packers play the 49ers.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of mean, But
what's the guy's name who's in charge of scheduling? He's just sitting here like, well, guys, we need to create some intrigue.
Yeah, for the preseason.
What's his name? That's going to bother me. You know the
Mike
guy,
North.
right?
Mike North. Not that Mike North, but
yes, the other Mike North.
The other Mike North. No, his name's really Mike North. He works for the NFL. Does the scheduling. Yeah. Anyway, welcome in. Follow us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns. Make sure you're reading The Athletic, theathletic.com/Hoge and Jahns, where you go to subscribe. Make sure you're reading all CHGO. You can subscribe there as well. Get your first month for 50 cents. We have a special episode for you today. I'm really excited about this. We sort of stumbled on it in one of our early camp episodes. We were sort of talking it out on the show. So you may have heard us come up with this idea. And then really it was Johnsy did most of the legwork on this to put the interviews together.
This is a Jahns and Friends episode.
It is. It's Jahns and Friends. I like it. But I'm going to be here to sort of react to what we learned along the way. But we were talking about my high expectations really for Justin Fields in this camp is what launched this idea. Because then all of a sudden we were thinking, okay, well, what was Josh Allen's second camp like? What was Joe Burrow's second camp like? How about Justin Herbert? Some of these other young quarterbacks that have already established themselves and are much higher on Mike Sando's quarterback tiers in such a short period of time, which theoretically is still a possibility for Justin Fields this year.
They're all tier 1 quarterbacks.
Yes. That's a good point. Okay.
Numero uno.
I don't know if Justin Fields is going to get to tier 1 by next year, but I wouldn't completely rule it out. I think there's a possibility. But the question really is, what can we learn from these other situations? Every quarterback's different. You don't know how it's going to work out, but I think there's still a lot we can learn about how Buffalo went about their decision to draft Josh Allen and how they built around him, what they did to put him in a position to have success. Same thing in Cincinnati. So Johnsy went out, found Joe Buscaglia, who covers the Bills for The Athletic. All three of these guys have been on the podcast before at various different points when the Bears have played these teams. But so Joe jumped on with Jahns and talked about Josh Allen. Then Paul Dehner, who covers the Bengals, was on the show last year when the Bears played the Bengals. They talked about Joe Burrow's development, and then same thing with Daniel Popper, who covers the Chargers, and Justin Herbert. So we're going to go through these interviews one by one, let you listen to them. Each one's 20 minutes, so this is definitely going to end up being a longer episode, but I think it's a good one. I think you guys are really going to come away with maybe a better idea of just what it takes to develop a quarterback, and then we can compare it to the situation Justin Fields is currently in. And while we're still not going to know what's going to happen this year, maybe have a better sense of what's fair to expect, I think is really a good way to put it.
And you'll see me change clothes.
Oh, you have different outfits in each one.
Yes, I didn't plan that.
Nice. Well, you did have to. We talked about trying to do this all together, but everyone's covering different teams on different schedules and training camp at different time zones. It just really wasn't possible. But I think this is a good way to do it anyway. I'm telling you, you're going to learn a lot from these interviews. So let's start with Josh Allen, Joe Buscaglia, about 18 minutes, I think, here on one of the better quarterbacks in the league. It's really good stuff. Here it is.
All right, let's bring in our good friend Joe Buscaglia from Buffalo. He's the Bills writer up there. And Joe, what's it like covering a quarterback, a real one these days? You used to live our life.
I did.
But now you have Josh Allen.
Yeah.
How are things in Josh Allen world?
It's wild because I went from the land of Trent Edwards and Brian Brom and Levi Brown, Thad Lewis, to somehow covering an MVP level quarterback, which has been a wild transition, especially because like in the early stages, everyone thought he sucked. And then he really hit a huge momentum building season in his third year, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit, but yeah, it's been a complete flip of everything I knew to be true, covering a football team. My first year, they started the year 0-8, end of the year 4-12. Now they're perennial contenders, which is wild considering what Buffalo used to be here.
Yeah, they made us fill out this over and under thing on wins for NFL teams. I think the Bills were like 11.5. Was that right?
Yeah, they're up there. I think they're the highest or tied for the highest.
Yeah, I went over too.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, especially being an unbiased person covering the team, because like our employers want predictions, and it's like I feel like I'm a homer if I say, oh, I think they're going to make it to the Super Bowl, but I actually think they're going to make it to the Super Bowl because they're just that freaking good. So
that's nice.
Yeah, it's weird. I covered my first playoff game like in 2017. That was wild. So yeah, it's been a slow build.
I've covered the Bears since 2012, and I've covered one playoff game.
Wow.
So I know exactly what you're talking about. But that's we're not here to talk about that team. We're here to talk about quarterbacks. That's why we're talking to you, Daniel Popper, Paul Dehner, because you have young quarterbacks who emerge, teams that got it right. And I want to go back in the time machine a little bit when Josh Allen is drafted, because he's been Nate Tice, our friend, another friend of the podcast, another athletic colleague, has compared in an ideal world that the Josh Allen path is the one that Justin Fields now takes. But I want to go back to when you saw Josh Allen at first and how he got better during camp, because we're seeing a lot of up and down moments from Fields in camp right now. So if you go back in time, what did you see from Josh Allen in his early camps, his second camp, into his third camp?
Yeah, the second camp I think was a really big transition for him, because he kind of had an idea of what Brian Daboll, the former offensive coordinator here, wanted from him, and he put in a lot of work in between the time when he left the team after his rookie season up until training camp, and he showed market improvement in a lot of areas. I'm sure everyone remembers when Josh Allen was a rookie. I think there was one training camp pass where he just completely overthrew a swing pass and everyone lit him up on Twitter. And that was like, oh, Josh Allen, he stinks. He can't do anything. But he slowly but surely worked on that. One of the big talking points for him, or not talking points, but one of the big things he needed to improve upon was his lower body mechanics, especially when he was throwing to his left side. And I remember seeing him come back and be like, whoa, that's fixed. And, or at least he is in the process of fixing it. So that was kind of the big leap into his second year. Were there still some up and downs? Absolutely, because we didn't know exactly what he was going to be. But it's funny because now he's going into his fifth year. So I had to go back and read an outright dissection of his second year that I wrote back in 2020, February of 2020. And the second year was really such a pivotal year for him in how much he has improved. His short to intermediate area accuracy improved dramatically from year one to year two. His time to decision in the pocket was one of the biggest things of how he was able to become a more efficient quarterback. Finding the balance between risk and reckless, which he did not do well his rookie year. There was one play in particular, I think in Green Bay, where he was running for his life, and then all of a sudden he like chucked it over his shoulder as he's running to his right, deep down the field, like 40 yards. And of course it got picked off because that's what happens in the NFL. But he like that part of his game was started to go away. I think his turnovers per play went down from like one every 26 throws to one every 51 throws from year one to year two. So these were all things about him, but you always kind of got the sense about Josh Allen, and this is where I think the importance of it really lied, because in his rookie year, you would see him go through and make a mistake, and then it's just an incredible self-scouting, lack of ego sort of thing. He would go into practice, go in the film room, and then he would fix it within days. And that was the mark where I'm like, okay, that's different. I've never seen a quarterback do that before, because you've covered a ton of quarterbacks, Adam. Like you see these guys, like they said, yeah, right. You see, they're like, okay, yeah, I got to be better in this area, and then they just do the same crap over and over again. Josh was different in that respect, and that's why I thought that he really had a chance to be something in Buffalo. And turned out that those steady improvements, where he saw one thing, aimed to fix it, and then fixed it within a matter of days, weeks, and then continued along that path. That was the remarkable thing about him, and that's why I think we're seeing the finished product that we're seeing today.
How did that almost intensify in his second camp? Because you have Fields in his second camp right now, and there's been some mistakes, like a lot of incompletions during 7-on-7 drills where things should favor the offense and whatnot. So everything you just said, did that take another step in his second year? And then off that, like, how did maybe the organizational messaging and stability help him through it all? Going through his first, second, I'm talking about, like, how did that help him?
Sure. Yeah, it definitely helped him, because they continue to give him more weapons. His second year, that's when they went out and got him Cole Beasley and John Brown, which ended up helping him tremendously. And I know it's kind of the opposite in Chicago right now, where they're not really giving him the weapons like that. I mean, at least some bona fide good veteran players that can be productive in your system. They also figured out what worked best in terms of a receiver for him, and that really helped him go to the next level, because his first year, like, they still were going with the bones of Kelvin Benjamin at times, and Robert Foster was a deep downfield threat, but didn't really do anything else besides that. They just really didn't have the type of good receiving core around him, and I think he struggled a little bit in that respect. But once they started to give him these guys who can gain separation and give him a bigger window and good route runners, that's what they have been targeting again and again and again since 2019, his second season. And look at their receiver core now. It's full of them. Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, who has gotten better at separation, Isaiah McKenzie, who's great in man-to-man separation, Khalil Shakir, who is another rookie who can do all of that. Jamison Crowder is a good separator against zone coverage. Like, that's what they found out about Josh Allen. So it's figuring out the quarterback, and then helping support him organizationally and a slow build up. The camp, I don't know that there was this huge jump for him. I think it was more so going through the paces of actual games and completely screwing up one week to the next, and then incrementally improving from there. Like, he was horrible at hanging on to the ball for a long time in his rookie year, and even into his second year. And then all of a sudden something flipped in, I don't know, midway through the season in 2019. Same thing with kind of the short to intermediate accuracy and the that definitely improved from it by the time we saw him in camp. But like the decision making, the processing, it all kind of improved. And he still had areas to grow that he needed to grow. Like, overload blitzes still gave him trouble back then. And there were some other areas, like he put the ball on the ground a bunch because he tried to run too hard and try to lower his shoulder against people. Like, these are all things that he needed to continue to learn, and that he did learn by his third year. But there were definitely signs of improvement. But it all came down to the games, and then almost like that feeling of embarrassment where he realized that he was the reason that things went awry, and he was like, I'm never doing that again. And that's the area of the lack of ego, the self-scouting, the self-improvement thing. That's what is just a bit different about him, and that's why I think he improved so rapidly.
To go back to your receiver point, as like an observer, somebody who's tracking practice, like, was it difficult to separate? I mean, now you do, but you have this prize prospect quarterback throwing the guys that may or may not be on the team in a year or two, or even in a month or two, a week or two. Like, how did you cover that? How did you separate that? And like, how did that? I don't want to say hinder his development, but I mean that factors in when you
Yeah.
don't have a Stefan there from day one.
Yeah, I think with Josh as a rookie, I think everyone kind of knew heading into 2018, coaching staff included, that they were in for a bumpy ride. Like they didn't want Josh to start at the beginning of the year. They wind up actually it was in Chicago after AJ McCarron had a comeback preseason game of the ages for the final preseason game. They wind up trading him because AJ wanted to start, and they're like, well, no, you're gonna fall in line eventually. You're not going to be the full year starter. So they ended up going with Nathan Peterman at the beginning of Josh Allen's career. He gets his doors blown off in Baltimore the first week, and then they have to put in Josh and just figure it out from there. But there was always this sense.
Sounds so familiar, but
oh yeah, it's. I'm sure you have lived many of these lives. It all. I think everyone kind of knew in 2018 that it was the rip down year. Like the Bills, as soon as Brandon Beane came on board, he's like, all right, 2017, we're going to compete with, and then set themselves up to get in the realm for a quarterback. 2018, rip it down to the studs, fix the salary cap situation, be able to have more flexibility. And then 2019 is the year that they start to build up when they see if they have something in the quarterback. So it's always followed this kind of trajectory. And so to that point, like Allen, we knew it was going to be some crap around him in terms of the receiver room, but they wanted to see what they could get. Like one of those guys that was on that 2018 team, is pretty much going to be, it looks like he's in a good position to be their starting slot receiver this year in Isaiah McKenzie. So they were trying to find guys wherever they could, give guys opportunities, see if they could find some hidden gems, and they found some, but the on-field product definitely was hindered. And I don't know that it was the best thing for Josh, but as soon as you saw the talent start to get infused into that roster, that offensive roster, you start to see him incrementally going up, which is why the organizational plan was so important. I'm not sure what's going on in Chicago. You know better than I do, but I do know that the Bills had a really good plan and they stuck to it.
And they stuck with it. Yeah. So last one for you, 2020. What are your expectations going into that camp? And then what do you start seeing from Josh? We're like, oh, like this is clicking. It's probably some of the stuff you said earlier, but I mean, there's got to be a couple plays or just the way he's starting the process. What did you see when he enters his third camp with the Bills?
Yeah, what's wild was that third camp, because it was the pandemic camp. That one, I wasn't like super blown away by Josh. I thought it was just like, all right, he's pretty much the same. Like, we'll see if he actually makes a jump. But when he got the games, the way that he was beating overload blitzes and early on into the game, because that was the book on Josh for a while. It's like if you blitz 8 at him, he's going to crumble. But he was getting the ball out quick. He was getting the ball out accurately. Stephon Diggs, that was his first year with the Bills, and they just shot to the moon immediately. And I remember games where they crumbled down the stretch with Josh at the helm in previous games. And then there was, I believe it was week 3 against the Rams of 2020. It was in Buffalo, and the Bills went up a crazy amount, probably about like 20-something points. The Rams marched it all the way back with Jared Goff, and it looked like they were on the cusp of winning that game. They take the lead in that game, and Allen put together this dynamite end of game drive where he showed the poise to move defenders with both his legs and his eyes, stayed tall in the pocket. That was another thing for him. He used to leave the pocket like crazy early on in his career. He became so much more stoic in the backfield and just started to trust himself that he could dice up a defense, a really good defense in the Rams, by the way. And they go down, they march it down, and they score a last-minute touchdown to win that game. I think it was 35-32. That was kind of one of the games where it's like, okay, this dude might be onto something this year. And it was just a continuous progression where they were just off to the moon almost every single week, it seemed. It was just an incredible passing year. And one of the talking points from that year was like, okay, well, are they doing this because there's no fans in the stands? Like, are they going to come back to life if there are fans in the stands? But it continued last year. And the guy is, I mean, he has graduated. He is just a great NFL quarterback. And it's just a matter of how high they can fly with him, how much they can continue to do this while he has the ability to rush the way that he can. But all that said, that third year was just a pivotal, like, okay, this guy is now everything that they've ever wanted. But it couldn't have been done without that second season and being able to figure things out on the fly with more talent around him. That second year, I think, was a crucial year in his development, and he showed some definite signs of improvement in a lot of critical areas.
Did you ever have a moment at practice in a game in those earlier years, like, oh, this isn't going to work? I mean, again, you've covered so many guys.
Yeah.
You're almost conditioned for it, prepared for it.
Honestly, with him, you always have your BS detector up when you talk to the players and coaches and stuff like that. But with him, I always felt like that people were writing him off too early. People in the locker room, when you talked with him, even as a rookie, they were pumped. And usually guys can recognize guys, and it's not just the normal fluff. They thought he could really become something. And you would see these little moments in practice, and it's like, okay, I've never seen that before. Can he continue to do this more consistently? I never had like an EJ Manuel try to complete a pass but hit the hospitality tent at training camp moment with him. I never had a Trent Edwards. It's 4th and 9. You're down by 30 plus points. Let me run the ball out of bounds at the end of the game sort of moment. Like there was never anything like that with Josh Allen. It's just he's always had that talent, and it's like, okay, ball of clay. Let's see what he can do. But he's done some like eyebrow raising stuff since his rookie year, and now we're seeing what we're seeing today.
I'm gonna leave everybody with that thought. Joe, thank you so much. Always for coming on our podcast, always with a great insight. Let's hope Josh Allen stops fighting his teammates, though.
he got him golf cleats, Jordan Phillips golf cleats after that. So
Really?
all is good in the world in Bills land.
So was it Josh Allen's fault?
Yeah. Well, Jordan Phillips kind of like gave him a shoulder as he was going into the end zone, and then Josh, for some insane reason, decided to two-hand shove at Jordan Phillips, like face mask, shoulder pad area. I'm like, what are you doing? Even after the fact, Josh was like, yeah, that's my bad. But I've never seen a quarterback do that before in a training camp.
I've seen Cutler go after his teammates, but
really,
again, different era of Bears quarterback.
Yeah,
for different reasons, but not like in a fight, but like yelling at guys.
I've definitely seen that before, but like an actual like starting the skirmish sort of deal. It was funny. The center for the Bills, Mitch Morse, he didn't join the fray. All he did was go up and bear hug Josh and escort him way the hell away from the entire thing.
Yes. Got a new signing bonus because of it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. If you're not following him on Twitter, please do, and check out his stuff on the Bills page. It's always fantastic. Should be another good year for the Bills. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Adam.
Hey, if there's one thing I've been consistently bad about over the years, it is staying hydrated. But one stick of Liquid IV and 16 ounces of water hydrates you 2 times faster and more efficiently than water alone. I have my Liquid IV bottle in front of me right now, the tangerine flavor with the vitamin C boost in there for immune support. I absolutely love it. All the flavors taste good. Concord grape is probably my favorite. Lemon, lime, the pina colada, tropical punch, watermelon, strawberry, passion fruit, guava. There is not a flavor that I have tried that I haven't liked to this point. There's 5 essential vitamins in every stick: B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C, with 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. They're all good. And what makes Liquid IV so effective is the cellular transport technology, which is designed to enhance rapid absorption of water and other key ingredients into the bloodstream. Right now, you can grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco. That's where I always go to get it. Or you can get 15% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use code HOGE at checkout. That's HOGE. That's 15% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code HOGE, HOGE, at liquidiv.com. All right, John's really good. I mean, Joe's great.
Joe's the best.
Yeah, love having Joe on the show. It's too bad he's in the AFC with the Bills because we don't have him on enough because of that. But this was really good, and I have a lot of notes. Like just listening to the interview you did with him, I have a lot of notes that I think matter for Justin Fields a little bit. So let me just bring them up, and then you can react to kind of what I reacted to. But one of the first things I wrote down was Joe put in there how in year 2 in camp, it wasn't necessarily pretty, but he could see right away that the lower body mechanics had been fixed or he had been working on them. And that part was kind of shaking out in camp. That's very similar to what Justin Fields. When you hear Matt Eberflus talk about Fields, it's been a lot about the footwork and those lower body mechanics and all the work that's been put into that this offseason.
Absolutely. Unique. Well, truthfully, like you look at Josh Allen, you just see this raw arm talent, but you forget all the mechanical things that have to go into playing quarterback, the timing of plays, right? You're seeing it with Justin Fields, and you almost wonder again what they were doing last year. But I know different offense, different scheme, yada, 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 as they would say in Seinfeld, at least in one episode. But yes, I don't want to go back to last year, but yes, there is. That's where the storylines of Justin Fields and Josh Allen connect again.
Well, trust me, when we get to Joe Burrow, I have thoughts on how Justin Fields was handled last year. Because there's some nuggets in that interview where I'm like, oh my God, this is a completely different situation. Anyway, but one thing I also wrote down is the real improvement didn't come until the season started.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily, we're talking like year 2 of Josh Allen now, which was still, Josh Allen's kind of a rare case where it didn't really take off till year 3, right? So, but there was improvement once they got to the season. But one of the similarities was he was holding on to the ball too long, not getting rid of the ball. And that seemed to click once they got to the season. And I think that's another thing that Justin Fields, when I'm watching, I'm seeing improvement. As we record this on Thursday morning, we're coming off of Wednesday's practice. Wednesday's practice was a really good practice, I thought, for Justin in terms of ball placement. But the day before, when they're at Soldier Field, there were still plays where I'm like, throw the damn ball, just get rid of it,
Yeah.
And so I think that's still something he's working on. So it's kind of reassuring to hear that for Josh Allen, he was still struggling with that in camp. But once they got to the season, it just all of a sudden started to click.
There's a process for processing, right? Especially in the new offense. I think that's where the storylines start to differentiate between Josh Allen and Justin Fields, because Justin Fields in year 2 is learning a new scheme. But I put this in our athletic recap of practice yesterday. I think it's a good thing that Justin Fields has to throw to the Isaiah Coulters of the world. He needs to anticipate more. He needs to feel. He needs to trust the play. He needs to trust the mechanics of the play, his footwork, the timing. Just throw the ball sometimes. He doesn't have the same connection with those guys as he has with Darnell Mooney, and that's okay. Establish trust with the actual play call where they're supposed to be. I like that right now with Justin Fields, at least Wednesday's practice.
Now, another thing, though, speaking of those wide receivers, was Joe made it very clear that the Bills, it wasn't really until the Bills upgraded at wide receiver that things really started to take off for Josh Allen. So that part matters too. I mean, now I think the question is, the thing is he was still rattling off the Bills receivers. Look, their receiver room's better than the Bears. There's no question about it. But some of those guys that are not Stephon Diggs, like Stephon Diggs is clearly the big fish there when it comes to the wide receivers. Beyond that, they're not necessarily all household names. A lot of guys that have gotten better over the years. But I think that's the big question for me is maybe the Bears can survive with this wide receiver group if Darnell Mooney really takes off as one of those top tier wide receivers. Now, asking him to be Stephon Diggs or Jamar Chase, maybe a lot. But when you actually look at those guys, Jamar Chase is a little bit bigger. He's 6 foot, a little over 200 pounds. But Diggs is 6 foot, more like 190. Mooney's technically an inch shorter, 5'11", but he's a little bit thinner, more like in the 170s. That's the thing. But I guess the point is none of these wide receivers are necessarily those big, huge, go up and get it type guys. As long as they can separate, I think that can really make a difference for Justin Fields.
Well, we know Mooney could go up and get it. He's done that since college. And I think there were some highlight plays from camp of him doing that. Mooney's a separator with his speed and route running, like Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs, also like Mooney, a 5th-round pick. Now, he made his mark immediately like Mooney did in Minnesota. So we'll see how far Mooney can get. But, I mean, that's the receivers, just like in my notes going through the interviews again, the receivers that Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert have, like, there's one parallel. Like, they each have a guy.
Yeah.
And can Darnell Mooney become that guy? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Put extra emphasis on being the guy.
Yeah. No, I think
next step. Yeah.
It's completely fair. And the Bears, like at times, Allen Robinson was the guy, but he still wasn't the guy, like the way you're putting it. And I think that there's a chance Mooney can become that. But I think that definitely matters in this development picture. The other thing I wrote down was just like the timeline here. So Joe did a good job of, and this is important because we've actually talked about the Bills this offseason and how there are parallels maybe between what Ryan Poles is trying to do here. But I don't know if the years completely match up because 2018 was the year that the Bills like really tore the roster down to fix their cap situation, which is sort of where the Bears are now. But that was Josh Allen's rookie year. So when it got to year 2, they were able to start adding. And so unfortunately, Josh Allen didn't have to go through this reset that the Bears are going through, that Justin Fields is dealing with right now. So in all the ways that we've talked about how training camp was a waste of time, we've also talked about how, unfortunately, I worry about like if all of year 1 was a waste of time.
Yeah,
for Justin Fields.
Well, as Joe said, there was continuity with the coaching staff. Brian Daboll was there. And then you had, like, they stuck with this plan. They had this plan. As ugly as it got in year 1, as the tough moments came back in year 2, even though there were some rays of sunshine in Josh Allen's second season, they stuck with their plan. They stuck with their belief in Justin Fields, in Josh Allen. So by year 3, you saw Josh Allen become Josh Allen.
Yeah. And that might be a good lesson learned, even as we talk about other topics like Ryan Poles and the way he's handling this Roquan Smith situation. I just think about 2018, Bears played Buffalo, went into Buffalo. The Bears turned out to be a playoff team that year. The Bills had Nathan Peterman out there in that game. The Bears killed them. Remember that?
Yeah.
And
Eddie Jackson scoop and score. Jordan Howard running over, I'm blanking on the name, into the end zone.
But what we now know years later is the Bills were sticking to a plan at that point. And so while they're taking their beatings, which the Bears might do from time to time this year, they had a long-term view. They felt like they had the quarterback, and they just knew that they had to be patient. And meanwhile, the Bears were having like this flash in the pan season, and really they had all these flaws, and they didn't have a good plan.
I think that lack of a plan goes back a quarterback too. It's like Trubisky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost 2018, Matt Nagy's first year, that flash in the pan success. You could probably argue to this day that it was detrimental to the progress of that team overall, right? Because then they put all the chips all in, and Trubisky probably wasn't ready in that stage of his career to go all in. Needed more development. Like what happened to the plan under John Fox of Mitch Trubisky sitting the entire season? The Bears' plans came and went.
That's not cliche talk. That's real talk.
It is real talk, Matt. See you Saturday. They would like take these plans, crumble them up, throw them in the wastebasket. I mean, it goes back to Trubisky. Happened to Fields last year as a rookie. Different story in Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm just, I do think Ryan Poles has a plan, and he's willing to take his punches here and there to stick to that plan. I think this Roquan Smith thing, sort of a separate subject, is part of that, but also when it comes to the criticism of not giving Justin Fields weapons, offensive line, the way they've handled this, this maybe is Bills 2018, where they might have a young quarterback playing in a less than ideal situation. Because Josh Allen still played a bunch that year. I'm actually forgetting the circumstances of why he didn't play in that Bears game, but I think he still played in 10 games. But regardless, they're going to have to take their lumps a little bit this year. It's too bad that year one was maybe a waste for Justin Fields, but we'll see. All right. We'll move on to Joe Burrow. So Burrow, of course, dealing with a little bit of a different situation because was having some success as a rookie, tore his ACL in the course of year two, really takes off Super Bowl. But I still think you're going to hear this interview with Paul Dehner. Johns, as you talk to him, there are some similarities here that matter, including Burrow's second camp last year, and some parallels that also make sense with Josh Allen and how they relate to kind of all three of these quarterbacks. So here it is, Paul Dehner on Joe Burrow.
All right, now we're joined by Paul Dehner Jr. He covers the Bengals, the AFC Championship winning Bengals. That sounds nice. I don't know what that's like to cover, but Paul has been on the show before, friend of the podcast. What's going on, Paul?
If it sounds nice to you, it still sounds surreal to me. Okay, let's not act like the Bengals were the Pittsburgh Steelers just because they had their one run at it. It's still weird. It's still odd that I'm we still refer to the Super Bowl a bunch of times and plays that happened in it, and it's all very, very, very surreal here in Cincinnati. But such is everywhere that Joe Burrow goes. It leaves people in just a wake of surreal realities, not believing what he's been able to do.
Well, that's what we want to talk about because his former college teammate, right? Because Justin Fields and him were together at Ohio State briefly. Or Georgia. Ohio State, right?
Justin transferred in and Burrow went out. So it was
that's right.
Kind of like a ships in the night type thing. But
that's right. We're trying to figure out what's going on here with Justin Fields as he's in year two, new coaching staff. And there's so many good young quarterbacks. So for you, let's go in the time machine a little bit.
Yep.
It's the phrasing I used with Joe Buscaglia the other day. What did you see from Burrow in his first training camp, and then how did things change for him in his second training camp?
So it's a unique situation because the ACL. So with the injury, that was so much a part of his second training camp was him relearning how to feel comfortable in the pocket all over again. Really, I think to go back to the first training camp, I mean, it was rough at times, but you saw the relentlessness of getting it right eventually. So they would have a bad day on red zone and they weren't supposed to do red zone the next day. And Burrow went in and said, we got to do it again. We got to go back. That's not going to be what we're going to do on that. Let's go back and let's do it again. Let's get it right the next day. And they went back out there and he would kill it, and he would do well. And then you'd have the same thing with a long move the ball or a 2-minute or a 4-minute or whatever. And maybe one day it wouldn't go so well. And then like they did, the first, because this was COVID, this is 2020 year, no preseason. So they had a couple of kind of scrimmagey type things that they did. The first one didn't go so well. I mean, the offense looked rough. And then the second one came and it was like, oh, okay. And he was on fire and did really well. The same thing kind of happened when the season started. Like, he had some really nice moments. I mean, he was for a guy fresh off, just going out there playing his first game, no preseason, no anything in the NFL. He played pretty well, but it was a matter of, you saw it every time he started doing things the second and third time around, whether it was playing a team a second time, seeing coverages multiple times, seeing the way teams were approaching him, learning his receivers. You saw it. And that's why there was so much internal optimism in Cincinnati entering last year, was those 3 to 4 weeks before he tears his ACL in Washington in week 10, his rookie year. But you started to see it. He was starting to turn it on, and their offense was becoming, they points per drive. There was a 3 or 4 week stretch there before he got hurt that they were top 10 in points per drive. He was slinging it all over the place. And he'll tell you the legend of Burrow, there are many in Baton Rouge and Cincinnati now, was that on the flight back from Washington after tearing his ACL, he spent the entire time sitting next to Zach Taylor bragging about how they had thrown over 200 yards against Washington in that first half before he hurt his knee, which Washington had that year was just a destructive number one, great pass rush, all that stuff. Just spent most of the time bragging about how well they had done in the first half against Washington. And it was he was so looking forward to continuing to build that it felt really cut off. So that second training camp, it was so different because there was no doubting him understanding the system. He was very confident in everything mentally. It was a matter of him finding his own comfort level with his knee, feeling like he could have his normal pocket presence again, his ability to take off. So that was sort of the massive added obstacle. Luckily, he felt like he had made such progress before the injury the previous year that he was able to mentally just kind of have that going. It was the mental of trusting his knee again that became the major hurdle in a preseason in camp that was not very good. Like, you can go back and check the clippings, and they went national oftentimes. Jamar Chase was part of the story. He had all the drops, and that was the whole thing. Burrow was really
the lines in the football, right?
Lines in the football, yeah. All that can't catch. And he was dropping everything, and there was an adjustment for him. But on the side of that was Burrow and the offense not doing very well either. And so there was questions on, is this guy going to be good? I mean, how good is he? And there was real questions. And then as soon as the season started, there were no more questions. He got himself right. He got over the knee thing as the year went on, but he definitely got himself into a good place in week 1. And from that point forward, he really just took off. It was just a matter of minor hurdles of comfort with the knee, whether it be running, whether it be pocket movement, things like that as the year went on. But for the most part, I mean, the mental aspect of the game, all of that stuff, he really, blew everyone in the building away with where he was at with all of that early in year 1, but then certainly hitting the ground running in year 2 like a veteran.
How much just having like part of the story here in Chicago is it's a new coaching staff. He's going from Matt Nagy, who drafted him, to Luke Getsy, who's an extension of that LaFleur Shanahan tree. So you have Zach Taylor, who also is. I'm just curious, that connection between the two and how much it helped them get over his physical hurdles, but his mental hurdles, the relationship between him and Zach Taylor takes through it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the continuity is massive.
Yeah.
Just to not have to start over while going through the physical rehab of the ACL. was so huge. And Zach, Zach Taylor really gave him a lot of leeway and let it be his team. They took a lot of LSU concepts and put him in his rookie year so he'd stay comfortable. They adjusted away from a lot of stuff what they wanted this offense to be. And I think it's merging into sort of a Burrow McVay combination thing now at this point. But early on, they put a lot of the Burrow, the empty sets, shotgun, all that stuff, and took away some of the stuff that's the heavy play action that's so consistent with that system, and molded it to what he was comfortable with, and just Burrow's confidence in the team, knowing that they'll let him do what he's comfortable with, and keeping it so he always feels completely confident out there on the field. And that was the case in year 1. And year 2, that was easier to do. They could put more stuff in. He had a year full of work and all that other stuff. And so there was I wouldn't say there was less of the LSU concepts, but they didn't lean on them as heavily in year 2 because he was comfortable with everything else much, much more. And then he was really the game changer here is when Chase shows up.
Yeah.
I mean, because what people don't realize, and we can talk about relationships with coach. It's the way that Burrow was so comfortable, and Chase became such a weapon immediately, took an offense that really struggled to find where AJ Green is a part of it. He was aging. He couldn't really be moved around much. He wasn't going and getting the deep ball like he was in his younger days. I mean, the injuries just have caught up with him, and it's unfortunate, but it happens to everybody. They tried to run this offense with basically AJ Green taking all of those deep ball shots, and they were figuring that out too. Well, switch it a year later, and now Jamar Chase is taking all of those reps, and he's just an animal. And it all of a sudden, the confidence that came from that, of them realizing so quickly and having that instant chemistry like they had at LSU so quickly, they knew what they had. And the confidence that came from that within the coaches trust of Burrow and Chase to trust each other out there, and all of that just blossomed so quickly and so out of nowhere. They had high expectations for Chase, but nothing like that, to see it be so quick and so dynamic, that I think that was really what made everything take off as much as any relationship on the coaching staff did. The coaching staff set that up. They allowed them to just go play and feel free and confident out there. But that is what really ascended everything.
Let's stick with this point for a little bit, because I don't think it should be lost in this conversation. Like, Josh Allen gets Stephon Diggs. Oh, he's going to become a better quarterback.
Yeah. Joe
Burrow gets his old classmate and teammate from LSU. Plays better too.
Yeah.
Like, the instantaneousness of that. I'm just like, expand on how that confidence almost like spreads, not just like through the players, but the coaching staff and organizationally. Like, how did you feel it once Chase and him are connecting on the field?
I mean, you felt it week 1. I mean, there was so much. We talked about the controversy in preseason, how he wasn't catching the ball and the stripes and all that stuff. I mean, there was a lot of concern about Jamar Chase. Like, okay, like, is he gonna be able to catch the ball when the season starts? Like, everybody's saying the right things, but no one had more confidence in Chase than Burrow, and he was out publicly very defendant of him. He was privately very defendant of him, and so when he was able to instill confidence in Chase to not get down on himself when Chase was getting down on himself. I mean, he wasn't playing good. He was dropping the ball all the time. He looked stupid in preseason games. Like, he's getting clowned on ESPN on repeat because he drops 3 balls against Washington, his only targets in the preseason. So, but Burrow knew and was able to give that confidence to him. And in week 1, their 2-minute drill, midfield, Chase runs a go ball, and Burrow puts it right on the target, and Chase just blows by like he did all year. He blows by Bashad Breeland, of all people, who's trying at that point. That's how they thought. They were trying to cover Chase one-on-one with Bashad Breeland in week 1. And he just blows right by him by about 5 yards, catches it, goes in the touchdown, and does the gritty. And the energy in the stadium, within the team, within the offense, changed for good. It was like, oh, that dude is here now. We have that now. was the thought that everyone within the building felt. And Burrow knows how to unlock this thing. And he did, mentally, in keeping his confidence up and keeping him going through the preseason. And then obviously in playing the game and having that great connection and dropping on him. It was funny because that ball, the touchdown he scored that really unlocked everything in week 1 is a replica to the last time they threw to each other in the national championship game against Clemson. The exact same route, same ball, same location on the field, same gritty. And LSU did a cut up of them side by side, which is really funny because it was like, oh, that thing that everyone was in awe of in the national championship game and in that season for LSU, it's here now. And everybody recognized it right in that moment. It was a game changer.
When the problems are there in training camp, like these intangibles that you've talked about with Burrow, whether it's keeping up, his best wide receiver, keeping up his confidence, or demanding they go through the drill again so he gets it right. When like those tough moments are there and there's moments of doubt and moments of like we've been here before, we've seen failure before at quarterback. Like, how do those intangibles maybe calm the waters, calm the organization? I mean, did it calm the fan base when the problems were there in training camp?
People were more concerned about his health. I think people just around here, he walks on water. I mean, there's always confidence because Burrow's here. And it's been so long since they felt like they had a real guy and they saw enough and believed enough. And he changes everyone in the building. He's not a loud rah-rah guy. He's not, where he's not talking all the time, but when he speaks, everyone listens. He's got this aura about him when he walks in the room, and he's about the work. He's about, and it's not like your cliche first in, last out thing. He's just intense about the work every day. And it forces everyone else to get up on his level when it comes to prep, when it comes with taking practices serious, when it comes to taking drills serious, when it comes to getting it right. And that calms the coaches. It makes the coaches feel like the locker room can manage itself. It's Burrow's room. It's Burrow, Sam Hubbard on defense. They've got a good group of leaders surrounding him, but he's at the tip of the spear. Everyone knows it. And he makes everyone believe. I said it in the lead up to the Super Bowl. People asked about the difference. And I said, well, the difference, but this is special for me, was for the city, because the city always believed the worst was about to happen forever. 31 years of never winning a playoff game. They lost all 7 under Marvin Lewis. It was turnovers. It was injuries. Andy Dalton's thumb, Carson Palmer's knee, even in the city for other teams. Johnny Cueto, he pulls his oblique right before the first game of the championship series against the Giants, and Kenyon Martin broke his leg when they were number 1 in the country, the University of Cincinnati basketball team. Like, it was just, this city had this thing to it. But for some reason, with the Bengals last year, no one felt like the bad thing was about to happen. They just knew number 9 was coming out the tunnel. And that wasn't just within the city. It was within the team. Like, they won so many close games last year because they were a team that emptied the tank every week on both sides of the ball. And they really did. They had great special teams. Evan McPherson helped them win a bunch of games. And they always believed Burrow was going to bring them back. I mean, they would come back no matter what. They're down like 24-0 against the Chargers. And you felt like you knew they were coming back, and they did. They didn't win, but they had the lead at one point. It's like every single week this stuff would happen. And the players knew, they just believed that Burrow's going to get us back in this. We got that guy. And that does change everything when everyone knows it. And until you have that, there's always going to be that doubt that's going to hold everybody back.
Yeah. Was that like it from the start? Like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, because he was, CJ Uzama used to joke. Like, yeah, he's always the smartest person on the field, and everybody knows it. Like, just in year 1, I mean, he was out there, making checks that CJ was like, I've never even seen anybody. Can we do that? And because he's so attuned to the game. He's so smart. He just gets it, and he understands what's going on out there. And it impressed everybody immediately. They knew it in that first camp that he was going to be a guy that once he starts seeing enough reps, seeing enough defenses, he's always going to figure it out. And that's why, especially once they saw that first season, he got to that midway point and he was figured it out.
Yeah.
They knew what they had.
I'm talking to Paul Dehner. Make sure you're following him on Twitter, Paul Dehner Jr. Everything Bengals for The Athletic. Check out his podcast as well. Paul, just like one more question for you. Scheme-wise, since I know what you mentioned before, they put some LSU concepts in, but we have Justin Fields here in Chicago, and they're doing some things that worked well with them last year. They're using his athleticism a lot, but you're seeing the outside zone, you're seeing the play passes, the changing of launch points, those McVay, Shanahan influences. What are the Bears getting, and how long maybe did it take for it to click with Burrow? I think you mentioned maybe a year, but why do you like it? Why does Burrow like it? Why do the Bengals like it? Why does it click in time?
Well, I mean, the marrying up of the pass game and the run game really plays well together, and they're able to, when you are able to get the play action, everyone comfortable in it. It's different because here they just end up in so many advantageous matchups because of their receivers. So, I mean, every time he runs play action and you get any guy step in the wrong direction by a foot, it's Boyd, it's Higgins, it's Chase. It's over, and Burrow's so good at seeing it and knowing where the guy took the wrong step immediately. The interesting thing is I think it has taken a lot to get used to how much the deep play action with your back to the defense, when you're a processor like Burrow is. I don't know enough about Fields to speak to him in that respect, but I think there's a discomfort in having your back to the field when you want to be looking at it. And I think that has been the hardest part. And maybe he's even still working through because they haven't done play action as much. They've done much more shotgun empty than anything else, just because that's where he's most comfortable. And so to develop a run game that does the same things that the wide zone does, it has been a bit of a challenge for them to get that all figured out. I think they hope this year that they'll take the next step in that, but I think that's a hard part, when you come up and you're not used to doing that, is getting used to the game is happening behind my back right now in this 1.5 seconds. And that I think has taken the most time and is one of the most challenging things. But, then when you turn, there's always so much, if you can hold it, if you can protect it, you see it all the time, and it
Burrow could throw it.
Yeah, it goes. And then the run game, I mean, Joe Mixon had a really, really good year, and they were able to, early in the season, they really leaned on it. I mean, because of Burrow's knee, they weren't sure how much they could do with him. And so the game plans were conservative. They were run heavy, particularly in early downs, to try to protect him over the course of a long season. And the running game thrived. They ran the wide zone. They ran it down people's throats. People don't realize that at that point in time, it wasn't as much about Burrow. Not until later in the season, they realized the only way they're going to get all the way to the Super Bowl is if they just say, here goes Burrow. Let's unlock it. He's ready to go. We know the line ain't great, but we think that that's how we can get there. And it was, is when they really kind of went more pass heavy and ditched some of the run heavy stuff from the early part of the season. But when they got that going, you can really see how it just demoralizes teams. I mean, they were demoralizing teams with the way they were running the ball early in the year.
Okay. Here's one more.
Okay.
The raised expectations of
Yeah.
this team, like covering it, the feel of it, how is the team handling it? Like, you have that type of success last year. I mean, things change a bit, the pressure and all that. Like, what's the vibe like now?
It's, it's interesting. It's, again, where we started, it's still surreal. Like, I think around here, I mean, it wasn't long ago. I mean, they had 28,000 people at their scrimmage in the stadium here.
Wow.
I mean, I had butts in the seats numbers from 2 years ago around the end of the season. That was less than that. They had 26,000 people for a Christmas Eve game. I mean, the last couple of years, that's how disenchanted the fan base was, disconnected they were. And now they have a waiting list for season tickets. They are sold out. It's everywhere you go. It's Bengals this, Bengals that. I mean, they were an embarrassment. They were an embarrassment locally forever. Okay. They were the joke. And now they're everything everyone loves him. Everyone loves him. And so the players feel that. And I think that's part of it. But inside the building, they're pretty grounded, and I think that starts the quarterback. It's about what we're talking about here. Like, he keeps them grounded. He's put in the work every day, motivated, uber motivated, and wired that way by everything, and you better believe 23-20 against the Rams in the Super Bowl is the latest thing that has him uber motivated this year. And people follow that lead. So it's a pretty grounded group. They seem to be at this point. Maybe we'll reevaluate that as the season goes on. Maybe we'll say, oh, that group was reading their press clippings and this, that, and the other. And they have had issues. Jesse Bates is kind of, wanted a long-term deal, and he's on the tag and he's not here yet. And, there's other people I think that probably wanted to get paid, and they lost a couple of people, Larry Ogunjobi and CJ Uzama, but really not much. There's a continuity to them. There's a confidence to them and an understanding of what they are. And there's not a lot of bickering or infighting, or anybody feeling like they're great. I mean, Chase is super grounded, which helps. Your stars are kind of just here, nose to the grindstone types. So I think that helps. So things have changed around them, and the expectations are insanely high, but they're confident, and they don't seem to be caught up in that at all. But again, then we judge. Everybody feels good about that type of stuff this time of year, and then we judge 4 games in, and it's fire everyone, right? So
they're 2-2. Completion percentage
right.
around 50.
No, 2-2. Yeah.
I think they take that here. They would. They would. Thank you, Paul. Always enjoy your stuff. Thanks again for joining the podcast. Everybody, be sure to check his stuff out on the Bengals on The Athletic. Thanks again, Paul.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
As you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Adam. That's linkedin.com/Adam to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, so not exactly apples to apples here in the situation that Joe Burrow was in, especially when you throw in the ACL injury and trying to come back in camp last year while he's still coming off that ACL. But it still stood out to me, Johnsy, that Paul said that and I kind of forgot about this, but there were a lot of headlines on the Bengals camp last year and it not being very good.
Yeah.
Specifically when it came to Jamar Chase, who was a rookie at the time, and his drops, but also like the offense as a whole, just not looking that great. And then I think, as Paul put it, once the season started, there were no more questions. Like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, they just took off.
They knew it worked. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that really, in both of these cases, like we've kind of learned that Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, the actual training camps weren't necessarily great in year 2. Now Burrow certainly took off more as a year 2 quarterback than Josh Allen did, but maybe this is an example of, all right, if it's not sorted out in training camp, maybe there's still hope that Fields figures this out during the season.
Well, Joe Burrow, again, going back to like the personnel around him, had some studs at receiver. That's where the similarities are with Josh Allen, right? He gets Stephon Diggs, things take off a bit. Year 2, Jamar Chase comes in, his old college teammate, and instantly the field is stretched. It's bigger, right? You got T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. You got some guys. He had some players out there, a group of receivers. I think one thing that I forgot before I prepped for that conversation with Paul Dehner is that Zach Taylor's an extension from that Matt LaFleur, Kyle Shanahan tree, much like Lou Getsy.
Yeah.
And how he talked about it took Burrow some time to get used to the footwork, used to the mechanical operation of that offense, and how they tailored some of the things early on to what Joe Burrow did well in college at LSU. How they adjusted, and now they're still implementing some of the stuff that Taylor wants to run, the stuff that he's very comfortable with coming from that tree.
Can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
I almost like threw my computer when I heard that, because I was like, no shit. Like, that's what you should have been doing with Justin Fields last year. When you hear that Zach Taylor specifically put things from the LSU offense into the Bengals offense to help Joe Burrow in his rookie year, just to
He
make
still
him
did it in his second year.
Yeah. Said, and then as necessary, started to weed them out, take them out. So it eventually shifted more to like what the Bengals offense, what Zach wanted the Bengals offense to be. So it wasn't as much in year two, but still used some of that. Probably also to help Jamar Chase at that point as he comes in that season. And it's just like, whereas the contrast to last year was just like, all right, Justin, you're here. Like, learn the Matt Nagy system.
Go be that guy. We hope.
That's frustrating.
What a waste of time training camp was, guys.
But again, yes, you have a Jamar Chase, so
that helps a lot.
You know, but maybe I don't know. Am I overrating what Darnell Mooney's done so far in camp?
I don't know if he's going to be Jamar Chase.
Well, yeah.
But I think in terms of paths, Stephon Diggs, as a former 5th-round pick, as a guy who's very reliant on his route running, who can still make the splash plays when the opportunity is there, I think it's a great career comparison for Darnell Mooney.
That's a good point. Hopefully they don't have to trade him like the Vikings had to.
Well, the Vikings also drafted a nice replacement.
Well, that's also true. Both of whom might.
You need receivers. But again, maybe next year is when the story changes. Patience is harder, this process. I keep reminding myself to be patient with the process that we're seeing, knowing that in the grand scheme of things, that the expectations are supposed to be low this year for the entire team, not just for Justin Fields, but for the entire team, with something more meaningful possibly coming next season.
I think that's the big headline from just listening to these interviews, is the emphasis on some patience.
And that's tough to get through because this season hasn't even started yet.
Yeah. By the way, because I know you care about this, I think my 2 keepers this year might be Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Talk about good drafting.
Are we ready to hear from Daniel Popper yet?
Yeah.
No, don't care.
Anyway, who cares?
That was about my fantasy team. Who cares? Not Daniel Popper. We do care about what Daniel Popper has to say for sure. So one more of these interviews on Justin Herbert now, which is a little bit of a different situation, but still, I think it's good to hear part of the reasons maybe why Herbert really took off a little bit quicker, but definitely in year 2. And anyway, Daniel Popper's great. Covers the Chargers for The Athletic. Here he is on Justin Herbert.
All right, let's continue this quarterback conversation. Let's go out west. Daniel Popper. He's our Chargers reporter for The Athletic. Make sure you're following him at Daniel R. Popper, right? There's an R in there.
There is an R and the reason for that, and not to get us off topic right off the bat, but there is a very famous sculptor named Daniel Popper who is always above me on the Google search and is a prominent presence on Instagram and Twitter. He does these actually very impressive landscape sculptures in various national parks. He did one in Joshua Tree. And so every 3 months or so, he'll do a new sculpture. and people will be tweeting at me like, "Oh, I didn't know you sculpted too." I'm like, I don't. That's why there's an R in the Twitter handle.
No, I just watch football. I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
My favorite one of that is there's the Jay Cutler bodybuilder. So did you ever know this?
I haven't seen that now.
So on Twitter, there's Jay Cutler, the quarterback. I covered him here in Chicago, and there's Jay Cutler, the bodybuilder. But he's the one actually on Twitter. I mean, this dude is enormous, but he would get all the blowback from fans after losses, which you always found, pretty funny. But he's like this massive, weightlifting human being. I always got a kick out of that.
I got to reach out to sculptor Daniel Popper to see if anyone's tweeting at him with their Chargers misery after losses.
Yeah, maybe actually.
Yeah,
I bet you. Maybe.
A little crossover.
Yeah, but you guys got a quarterback now, and that's why what we're talking. We're still trying to figure out what we have here in Chicago. Justin Fields has had his promising moments, but the Chargers have a good one. They've had a good one almost instantaneously. So we're talking training camps here. We're 10 days in here in Chicago, at least the point that we're talking right now. When Justin Herbert was in camp for the first time, you're going from Phillip Rivers to Herbert. Like, what did you see? What did you feel like? Did you see it right away? Did you see it almost right away?
Yeah. I mean, it was a weird situation because Anthony Lynn had brought in Tyrod Taylor as Rivers' backup. They kept him to be the starter, and Anthony and Tyrod went back a long time from their days with the Bills. And then what happened in Cleveland with him getting usurped by Baker Mayfield, I think Anthony really wanted to give Tyrod a real shot at starting. And so Tyrod took all the first team reps. In Justin's first camp, he was working with the second and third team, throwing to, Jalen Guyton, KJ Hill, some of these, bottom of the depth chart or roster bubble receivers. But you see it right away. And I think you can sort of apply that to a lot of different positions. Like when you're watching offensive line play in training camp, you can tell right away if a guy is a real player or not, or if he's going to have a shot to play well as a rookie. And I think the same thing goes for quarterbacks. The first thing that jumps out is he's massive. Justin is tall, and he's a fantastic athlete, smooth mover, can get outside the pocket, and then the ball just explodes out of his hands. And I remember a specific throw that he made to the sideline in his first training camp, and I'm just sitting there being like, that's different. Because, Rivers was never an arm strength guy. He was all about anticipation, football IQ, those sorts of things. So it was a little bit different than what I'd ever seen from a quarterback. But just from a physical standpoint, the first time he really uncorked it in a training camp practice, you were like, yeah, like that's it. That's different. And that's like an NFL caliber throwing on.
How did he handle that? Not you. How did he handle being the number two? Because that's very similar to Justin Fields' story. Here they had Andy Dalton. They even had like Nick Foles taking snaps away as the number two, number three, whatever have you quarterback in camp, where Fields wasn't getting as many reps as he probably should have being a first round quarterback. How did Herbert handle that situation?
Yeah, Justin's situation is so unique because, growing up, he spent his entire life in Eugene. And then the only thing that he ever wanted to do in terms of playing football was be the starting quarterback for the Oregon Ducks. Like that was the pinnacle for him growing up where he grew up. And he wasn't a guy that went to all these Elite 11 camps. He wasn't doing the recruiting tour. Like he would spend his summers in Eugene throwing to his high school teammates because he wanted to win a state championship. And then, he got the opportunity to play Oregon, but that was like the pinnacle. Like he had never thought beyond that. And then he goes to Oregon. He has success there, wins a Rose Bowl. He's talked about as a top quarterback prospect. He gets drafted. And even at that point, he didn't have a full understanding of like how talented he was. And it wasn't until he started working with John Beck in the pre-draft process. John Beck's a personal quarterbacks coach, and he's making throws in these training sessions. And John Beck had to tell him, like, Justin, there are 4 guys in the NFL that can make that throw. And Justin was like, really? Like he didn't know how good he was, So early in camp, like he was coming to this realization, like I have like a very rare skill set. And I remember John told me, like, after Justin's first couple practices and he had made some of these throws that I was talking about, he called John up and he's like, hey, like, I think I'm going to be able to do this. Like, I think I'm going to be able to play quarterback in the NFL, not like be great in the NFL, but just exist in the NFL. So early on, like that's what was happening with Justin Herbert, was him realizing how good he was. And then the other side of it was he was exclusively in a shotgun system in Oregon. I think he had like 2 snaps under center in his entire career or something. Like it might have been even less than that. It might have been like 1 at the goal line. And so early on in camp, like he was working on like the basics, like the fundamentals of the position, like how to take a snap from under center and hand the ball off correctly, And so it puts in perspective how crazy his rookie season was, because those are the things that he was working on in camp. So early on, I don't think he really like had much to handle in terms of like, oh, I'm not the starter, because he didn't care. Like he had so much to work on, and he didn't yet realize like how good he was and what his skill set was in comparison to other quarterbacks. And so that was the process for him early in camp.
So it takes this freak injury with Tyrod Taylor to get him on the field. Like they had no plans on playing him. They were pretty adamant about that too, weren't they?
Yeah. Tyrod was going to be the guy. Like, I don't think if that didn't happen with, Tyrod, having the collapsed lung because of the injection, like, and it was a result of him taking a big hit in that Bengals game. But if that never happens, Justin doesn't play in his first season, like at all. And then that timeline is kind of hard to wrap your mind around, right? Because he goes out and has the season he has a rookie. And then by year 3, he's a top 5 quarterback in the league, according to Sando's, quarterback tiers. Like, what does the timeline look like if he doesn't play as a rookie? I don't know. I've thought about it a lot, but that part of it is like mind blowing.
How does the organization, how did they handle that? The immediate success. How did he handle it? Take me into some of those intangibles, because like Fields saw the field sooner than the Bears wanted under Nagy because of an injury to Andy Dalton. And I don't know if the Bears were truly prepared for it. You saw the 9-sack game in Cleveland. There were some other sloppy performances by the offense, but at that point, maybe Nagy was out the door. The offense wasn't working, but here's Herbert thrown into the mix, and he just takes off. Like, how is the organization processing this? How are you processing this as you cover it?
Yeah, for me, it was like, why wasn't this guy the starter immediately? Like, that's the thing that never really made sense to me. For Justin, like, he didn't care about any of the personal success. Like, they were losing a lot of football games, not weighed on him. Like, he would sit in the locker room after games and some of these losses. I mean, they blew 5 straight 16-point leads. Like, they were up 21 points on the Bucks at one point, against Tom Brady, and they lost that game against Drew Brees and the Saints. That weighed on him. Like, he would sit at his locker after games in his full uniform for like 15 minutes with just his head down. And so that was like, for Justin, that was the hardest part of his rookie year. That was really what he was going through. Like, he didn't care that he was having all of this personal success and throwing for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns and doing all of these things, but he wanted to win, and they weren't winning. And that was like a big struggle for him, to learn about, the adversity of the NFL. And then I think for the organization, like, I don't think they felt like he was going to be that good right away because of some of the things I was talking about, some of the things that he had to learn in terms of the basics of the position. But they did a ton of work on Justin, like a ton of work. And they felt really confident in his makeup, first and foremost, that he had the work ethic, that he had the intelligence, some of the intangibles that you were talking about on top of the skill set.
Yeah.
So they knew he was going to be successful. They felt really good about their scouting process. I think they might've been a little surprised that he had as much success early on because of some of the basics that he was still learning. But yeah, for Justin, it was the losing, like, that really weighed on him, but I think it helped him grow. It helped him learn like what you had to do as a quarterback to win games. Like, it's not building a 21-point lead in the first half. It's how you play in the fourth quarter and making some of those throws. And they started winning games down the stretch. He had a great throw against the Falcons in a 1-possession win. He had that, that famous moment against the Raiders where he had this quarterback sneak touchdown in overtime, and he's yelling at the ref, I was in. That clip went viral. So I think you saw some growth there. But, if you were to ask him, like, what was your biggest takeaway from year one, it was learning and how to deal with losing and some of the more disappointing aspects of playing in the NFL.
How did the mood in that locker room kind of change? I mean, that's got to be pretty like electric, like having a young quarterback, even though the losses are there, you still have the highlight reel plays. I mean, the energy that a young quarterback creates had to be pretty, at least in your experience, pretty intense down there, right? Like, it had to be galvanizing in many ways.
Yeah. And defensive players started noticing early in training camp, and I don't think it got to a point where guys are like, why isn't Justin starting? Because Tyrod Taylor had a lot of respect in that locker room, and he has a lot of respect, around the league for just how he's gone about his business and his career. So I don't think it reached that point, but there were guys like Chris Harris was like, wow, like that's a real NFL throw early in training camp. So I think when he came on the field and played the way that he did, players, whether it was Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, some of these offensive players, people in the organization, you feel like you have a guy.
Yeah.
And that changes everything. And I know we haven't gotten to the Brandon Staley era yet, but he talks a lot about how that's the most important thing you can have in an organization. It's not necessarily like the most talented quarterback, but belief in your quarterback. Like that changes everything. And it doesn't change just what happens on the field in games. It changes how you practice. It changes how you operate. It changes, we throw around this word culture a lot, right? Having a good culture on an NFL team starts with having belief in your quarterback, because he's just so important to the bottom line of wins and losses. So it changed everything. When you realize you have this ascending player, you realize you have this guy that can make throws that very few other quarterbacks in the league can make. It changes just the entire feeling of the organization and brings a lot of hope for the players and for everyone involved.
It's interesting that you said that, because, of course, Brandon Staley got his NFL start here under Vic Fangio, where I think he was here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but was he here for some of the Mike Glennon Bears? No, was he? Yes.
It was 18. So I don't know.
That was his first year. So the first was for Mitch Trubisky when he was kind of giving that feeling of hope, and that faded after that. But like, you would think with most teams, this is where the Herbert Field story, kind of continues on the same path. That like having this young quarterback, good or bad, very good for Herbert, so for Fields, like gives the coaching staff like another year, like it buys them some time. But the Chargers didn't believe in that. They clean house, brought in Brandon Staley. Like, take me through that and how things kind of change for Herbert as he's got to learn a new offense. Like he's going from another offense to another offense.
Yeah, I think that was really part of the calculus. And I think in a perfect world, it would have worked out with Anthony Lynn. But I think some of the game management stuff just became too hard to swallow for the organization. There's still a ton of respect there. And what Anthony did for the organization, because he was hired as the head coach the season they moved to LA. They're in a temporary facility. They're playing in a soccer stadium in front of like 24,000 fans. And Anthony shepherded the organization through that time. And so there's a lot of respect for who he is as a man, who he is as a leader, keeping that team together and having some successful seasons, right? They made it to a divisional round of the playoffs. In his first year, they lost 4 straight games to open the season and still were in playoff contention by the end of the year and finished 9-7. But they felt like they needed more of an edge from the coaching staff. They needed guys that were going to think outside the box. They wanted to be one of these teams that was at the forefront of, schematic developments in the NFL, game management aspects, analytics, all that kind of stuff. And, that's what Brandon Staley is. Like, you want to feel like you have an advantage from a schematic perspective with your coach. And that was really, what happened with the move. And there's just a lot of moments in that Anthony Lynn final season where just game management stuff was blowing up in their face. They played the Patriots and, 4 different plays. They had the wrong number of players in the field on punt returns. There was, the Bills game where, the clock ran out and Justin had a QB sneak without a timeout left, and all the time ran out in the game. And there's just all these moments where you're like, they aren't giving themselves an edge from a game management perspective. And, that's so important because winning in the NFL is all about the margins. And if you can get an advantage in some of the game management stuff, like it's one of the reasons why Bill Belichick has been one of the most successful coaches in NFL history. And they felt like if they found the right guys that they could, continue Justin Herbert's development. And that was one of the things that came up in the interview with Brandon that was really important, was Brandon knew that this was a priority. And the entire thought process in the offseason after Brandon got there was, how do we make sure Justin Herbert is successful? And you can look at some of the personnel moves they made, whether it was bringing in Corey Linsley, Matt Filer, drafting Rashawn Slater, building up that offensive line, and really creating an environment where Justin Herbert could be successful. And a lot of the focus was put on Justin. How do we make him successful? It was one of the reasons why the defense wasn't very good last year, because there wasn't as much attention put on there in terms of building the personnel and that sort of thing. But they felt comfortable that Brandon was going to prioritize Justin's development, and it worked.
I should make a quick clarification. Yes, Brandon Staley was there for the passing of the torch from Mike Glennon to Mitch Trubisky in 2017. So he's seen some things here in Chicago. At least he has some experience to draw on. So in camp last year, like everything you just said, like what's the sense that this next step is coming in his career, where by the end of last season, like now here he is, like you mentioned, Mike Sando's tier rankings, a tier 1 QB. Like, what sense did you have for that as he's got a new offensive coordinator, new head coach in August, going through the ups and downs of camp? Like, did you see this coming? Like, how did this come to fruition at that point?
Yeah, it was interesting because the talk last offseason was like, oh, like Justin Herbert was so successful in these very volatile statistical categories, like, you know, great on third downs, and that usually doesn't carry over year to year. Great when under pressure, and that usually doesn't carry over year to year. So a lot of people were talking about regression. And I pushed back against that just because the talent. Like he's like, some quarterbacks are great under pressure because they are tremendous athletes and just have a certain makeup that allows them to make those throws and a skill set to make those throws in those situations. And then some guys just rise to the occasion on third downs. And I know statistics will tell you something different, but I felt like he was going to be able to continue to be successful in those areas. But the interesting thing with how they went about training camp is like they had a lot of respect for Justin's intelligence right off the bat. So they poured everything on him. Like they just gave him everything. They threw the entire playbook at him and were like, handle it because we know you can. And Justin told me at the end of July when I sat down with him in, I think it was like late July, maybe early August. And you know, he told me, like, I felt like I was drowning. Like early on in training camp, I felt like I was drowning because they just thrown so much at me. And with that context, you can then apply it to, okay, like there were some hiccups early on in camp. But I think the key was, how does the quarterback respond from a mistake? Like, I don't think I read less into the mistakes themselves and more into how does the quarterback respond? Because that's so crucial in NFL games. Like, do not let mistakes compound. If you do make a mistake, come back on the next drive and make up for it. And so that's one of the things that jumped out early. And I was actually preparing for this, just going back and reading some of my practice reports and going through some of my notes from last year. There were a lot of instances early in camp where he might have made a mistake, he might have thrown an interception, but it was like the next play he would come back and make a great throw, make a great decision. And I think that can tell you a lot about a quarterback's makeup and if he's going to be successful in the NFL. Because if he throws an interception early in practice and then that disrupts the entire practice and derails the entire practice and it turns into a bad day, that's going to tell you something about how a guy's going to react on game day if he does make a mistake, because it's inevitable. Everyone makes mistakes, except for maybe Aaron Rodgers. But everyone, you know, like every quarterback makes mistakes. And so how do they respond? So that was something that jumped out to me early. And then just the one thing in terms of comparing these two situations, right? The Chargers really set up a great environment for Justin Herbert, whether it was getting an all-pro center in Corey Linsley, building up that offensive line, the pass catchers, you know, they had in place. Like early in camp, he immediately developed this relationship with Keenan Allen where he was throwing to him on every third down. And, you know, do the Bears have that kind of infrastructure around Justin Fields? You know, it's hard to evaluate a quarterback, you know, absent of the infrastructure around him. So that was something that definitely helped Justin early. And you saw it, you know, with how he was operating with Keenan Allen, you know, how Corey Linsley was able to handle a lot of the protection adjustments and things like that early in camp to take some of the stress off Justin Herbert.
I think one of the differences is that was a yes and a no to you. That the investment has been limited to a Riley Reif and a Michael Schofield just days before camp.
Former Charger Michael Schofield.
Yes, it's trading. Yeah, a local kid. Yeah, Chicago local kid. It's trading for a N'Keal Harry, a bust from the Patriots draft selections, you know, for a 7th round pick. So the investment in terms of comparing these two situations of the two Justins, the investment at this point with Fields feels quite behind what they gave Herbert in well, I almost said San Diego, but in California there. Last one for you, and we're talking to Daniel Popper with the R. Follow my Twitter for all your Chargers needs. You covered Nick Foles. You covered Blake Bortles. You go out west. You finally see what a good quarterback looks like in Phillip Rivers. And then here comes Justin Herbert. Given your context, your history of covering various quarterbacks of various talents, Like, where does Herbert fit amongst, like, with the tiers? Like, that's right? Do you believe he's really like a tier 1 quarterback?
Oh yeah,
Like the NFL season right now. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, he's definitely a tier 1 quarterback. And I told Robert Mays this on the Athletic Football Show a couple weeks ago. Like, he's like, what is the conversation going to be like around Justin Herbert after the season? I genuinely think we're going to be having the conversation like, is he the best quarterback in football? Like, he's that good. And the reason I say that is because he is just scratching the surface of what he can do in terms of processing and operating from a mental perspective. Like, we all see the physical skill set, but like, this year he's been working on things like changing his cadence at the line of scrimmage. He didn't change his cadence at all last year. Like, they would just be like, they'd be like, all right, we're going on one, break the huddle every time, because they didn't want to put too much on his plate. Now he's starting to do those things. He's starting to try and draw the off the defensive line and edge rushers and off sides at the line of scrimmage, like changing things like that. And Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, has called it, football 202 stuff. Like, what does it look like when you take that skill set and you marry it with, elite processing and getting to some of like the masters level stuff that the Aaron Rodgers of the world, the Tom Brady's of the world have become so good at. And I think it's going to look like an MVP season. Like, I genuinely believe that, just as someone who's watched, every throw that he's made in training camp in his career, watched every single game. He's special, and he's underrated as a processor, and it's only going to improve as he plays more and understands more about what defenses are trying to do to him.
Yeah, and you saw it right away. Daniel, thank you so much. Thank you for your time again. Check out all his stuff on the Chargers, on The Athletic, especially if you listen to this podcast, you know where to go. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
All right, our next partner is a really coal product. Let's talk about Athletic Greens. If you're looking to get better gut health, more energy, or a stronger immune system in a really easy, natural way, you've got to check out Athletic Greens. I'm sure you'll all agree that most of us are not huge fans of having to take a bunch of pills or vitamins in the morning, but with Athletic Greens, you can get rid of all of those extra vitamin bottles and finally make some room in your cabinet. Athletic Greens is an all-in-one solution that actually tastes pretty good, and you'll really enjoy getting your daily vitamins. So what is this stuff? With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you are absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All of those things. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you 1 free year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/Adams. That's plural, Adams. Again, athleticgreens.com/Adams to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Okay, so in Herbert's case, I mean, his whole story is a little bit just crazy with the fact that it seems like every team doesn't want to play their rookie QB and then they end up playing him, for whatever reason. But in this case, like, nobody has a reason like this where the trainer stabs the starting quarterback.
You make it sound like it was some type of conspiracy. But that's a freak injury. That is, I've never heard anything like that in my 11 years covering the NFL, where the trainer accidentally punctures the lung of the starting quarterback. Forget just like an offensive lineman or like some, rotational defensive tackle. Your starting quarterback.
And it might be the greatest thing that ever happened in Chargers history. Not for Tyrod Taylor, but throws Justin Herbert in there. And for the most part, he has crazy success early on, then really turns it on in year 2 as he gets more and more comfortable. The one thing that did stand out to me, though, maybe in terms of similarities, was Herbert coming from an offense in Oregon that was basically all shotgun, which was something that Justin Fields had to deal with when he got to the Bears. Now, the Bears were still a heavy shotgun, but he had to learn to go under center. And I remember that being a thing, like even those first few days of rookie minicamp. Like that was the first time Justin Fields had to learn how to take a snap under center and some of those things. Now, I think that tends to be a little bit overrated. If you're good enough to be a star quarterback at Ohio State, I think you can learn how to take a snap under center and figure that out. But it's still a thing that they have to do. And if you don't have that same experience, if you're not really getting that experience at the college level, you got to go through that. So Herbert had to do that. Obviously figured it out. He's sort of just a freak when it comes to his throwing ability and some of the throws he can make. Justin Fields is too. Justin Fields can make some crazy throws, twist his body in insane ways. But Herbert's sort of on a different level there, I'd say.
Some of the notes that I had after this conversation is, well, let's continue the receiver conversation. Justin Herbert had Keenan Allen, another top-end, top-tier receiver who at this point rates higher than Darnell Mooney, does he not?
Well,
better than an Allen Robinson?
Keenan Allen was sort of always the comp for Allen Robinson in terms of contract before Robinson had that, ghost of a season last year.
True.
But yeah, I think I'll say this though, when we say can Mooney be Jamar Chase, that's pretty high. I think Mooney can give you what Keenan Allen's given.
Okay,
the Chargers.
I could get in line with that.
Yeah.
One of my most general takeaways from these conversations, and I think this speaks to our covering of Justin Fields as well, maybe even a little bit of Mitch Trubisky. I don't mean to group them in here, but hear me out for a second. How they could always see it, whether Joe, Paul, Daniel, they have a long history of covering their respective teams. Maybe not Daniel because he came from Jacksonville before that, but we'll call it a long history of covering bad quarterbacks. Guys who have come in, one of your flyers on guys, missed draft picks, journeymen, young guys who don't pan out. And they saw something different in Allen, saw something different in Burrow almost immediately. Then Herbert doing these freakish things as a rookie, completely became a legitimate starter immediately. You see something different. But going back to camp, you just see something different. That's what I thought of. Even going back to when Mike Glennon, Mark Sanchez, and Mr. Trubisky was here. Oh, you could tell. I think you said it a few times. You could tell right away who the best quarterback on that field was. Last year, saw it with Justin Fields. With all due respect to the Super Bowl winner and Andy Dalton, you knew who the most talented quarterback was on the field. The throws were different. The velocity was different. The legs were different. I thought that practice he had versus the Dolphins, that was the moment that the Bears missed. They could have taken that and built on it. He built on it himself in the preseason game, but I still remember our conversation afterwards. He earned some first-team looks. He never got it. They stuck with some doom plan. But you saw it in those few days right there against the Dolphins. There's a guy here. Justin Fields is a player, but they never built on that momentum.
That's a great point by you. That should have been something that was rewarded and, like you said, built on it.
You saw something different. There's another first-round quarterback in the other field. Mm-hmm. And Tua going against the Bears defense. We didn't see anything like that. Justin Fields looked like the guy. They didn't build on it. But back to my point, you saw flashes. You saw elite skills. And they all have a long history of covering different quarterbacks, just like we do. Justin Fields had something different. Let's see if Luke Getsy, Matt Eberflus and company can build on it.
So, and that's kind of where I wanted to end too, because going back to something Joe said on Josh Allen specifically, that I think matters a lot. One of the things he said was even when Allen was going through his struggles as a rookie, you could tell when you talked to players and coaches, and he even mentioned this.
This is a good point here.
Your BS meter goes off. One of the, I think, tougher jobs that we have as reporters covering this team is weeding through what does coach speak, what does player speak, what the PR reps are telling these guys to say, okay, versus what's a genuine thought, what's a genuine, honest comment on a teammate or whatever the subject happens to be. And a lot of times the best way to do that is to have honest conversations when the microphones aren't on, right? Behind the scenes. So the one thing Joe said was, despite all the struggles that Josh Allen was going through, everyone in that building loved him. Everyone in the building talked about him in a way that was different, that they still felt like they had something very special there. And I'll get to this coaching staff, but first, I go back to last year. I think it was like early September, late August, and I was having some of those conversations with, some of the same people that, quite frankly, ended up not putting Justin Fields in the best position to have success. And you can doubt and criticize, and that's all out there on the table. We know that. But the reality is, like, however much you want to criticize that coaching staff that is now out of here, they really, truly did believe in Justin Fields. Like, I don't think they had the best plan for him, but some of the ways that they would talk about him, like, they really, truly felt like he is, and probably still do feel that same way, is going to be the real deal for the Chicago Bears. And some of the early conversations with some of the new people around the building echo that to me. Like, I think Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus and Luke Getsy and Andy Janocko, everybody involved here, I think they believe in him. And I think even in some of the, comments that are made publicly with teammates, they all talk about Justin Fields in a way that is genuine, that is not just BS. And I even go back to, like, Lucas Patrick's. Here's a guy who wasn't in the building last year, and Lucas Patrick came in, and you could tell that he already, like, very quickly believed in Justin Fields. So I still think that carries weight, a lot of weight, actually, despite some of the struggles we might be seeing here and there on a random Tuesday practice, or maybe even in these preseason games coming up, or maybe once the regular season starts.
The intangibles. I wrote that down right here. Burrow clearly has them. Herbert, I think, learned to get them out of himself. It seemed like there was a shell there for a little bit, but learned to be that guy in terms of intangibles. But always had them. You hear about Josh Allen putting in the extra work. You hear this about a lot of quarterbacks, but it sticks different with different guys, with different traits, with different skills. I think Justin Fields is part of that right now. That might surprise people because we've been so negative on him, but we're not. We're just telling you what we're seeing. I think that's part of the Justin Fields package. It does feel different than what was previously said about Mitch Trubisky, because we heard all similar things, did we not? But clearly, some point there was a fracturing that happened in 2019, and I think that had a ripple effect throughout the entire team. The fracturing between the coach and the quarterback. We saw that really come to fruition in 2020.
But the one thing I think is different about Trubisky is there's a difference between saying the things that we used to say about him and his teammates used to say about him, which was, oh, he works really hard and people really like him. There's a difference between that and actually having what it takes to succeed. Sort of that, I think the word is probably confidence.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing when I compare what I've heard early on about Justin Fields compared to Mitch, that's what I think in hindsight was lacking with Mitch. You never heard, and I'm sure you're going to get quotes here and there that you can pull up, but I'm talking more about the behind the scenes, like real talk, the stuff that really matters. I don't remember people like really talking up Mitch's confidence in the way that they talk about Justin Fields just having that presence of being the guy.
Well, I remember talking about Mr. Trubisky's confidence as the losses and the missed throws
and the TVs having to be
kept
turned
increasing.
off.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole thing with Trubisky, I should probably get off that track because I think Justin Fields is on a different one.
Well, I think that's the point. That's why we bring it up.
Yes.
Despite what we're seeing, the overthrow to whoever that was in the corner of the end zone last week that went all over Twitter, that may look like a Mitch Trubisky play from the Bourbonnais days. But I think some of the stuff behind the scenes is different. I think that's the kind of the point that we're trying to make, that when it gets to the moment where it either clicks or it doesn't, there's a higher chance of it actually clicking in this case. And another thing, I think people need to understand is, and then we'll get out of here because it's been a long episode, but I think the thing that bears Twitter specifically sometimes is not understanding is there's a difference between being critical of Justin Fields in the micro and still believing him in the macro. Because I've received some of this too, where it's like, you keep flipping on Justin Fields. I've actually not flipped on him at all. Big picture wise, I have been and continue to be a believer from day one. But there's a difference between having that macro view, the big picture view, and still believing in him, and then still having to look at some of these practices on a day-to-day basis, and we come in here and we talk about them. It's okay to still be critical and be like, I don't know if that was the greatest thing. He's got to fix that. That's just doing our jobs.
Yeah.
And that's not bailing on our belief in him.
You don't think Luke Getsy is in there criticizing him for certain mistakes that he makes on the field?
Right. That's what they do.
Maybe not criticizing, but critiquing, correcting. It's part of the process here.
Remember when Justin got salty about those flip passes last week? Do you know what I'm talking about? He kind of got a little salty when he was being grilled about when he was flipping the ball like that. You notice how we haven't seen those yet or since?
It's been a couple days, yes.
I think part of the reason why he got salty in that press conference was because I feel relatively confident that when they went in the quarterback room that day, he probably got chewed out for doing those.
Yeah, you can't do that. Well, one of them was almost intercepted by Matt Adams.
One was, most of them were bad. Most of them didn't work. So that's okay for us to come here and be like, I don't think that's a good thing. He probably shouldn't do that, because I guarantee you the coaches are doing the same thing. All right. Well, this was fun. John's great job with those interviews. Really,
Thanks,
they were really well done.
I hope everybody enjoyed them. Lots in there.
Yeah.
Listen back, listen again.
Big episode, and an episode you can listen to, 3 weeks from now if you want, as well, just to kind of use as a reference point. Hope everyone learned a lot about quarterback development. Doesn't mean Justin Fields is going to turn out to be Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, or Justin Herbert. But I think it might make you feel good about there still being a chance of that happening.
I would say there's different ways into tier 1. No. You want to end with something better than that?
Well, no, I would just say I think I'm where I have been and continue to be with Justin Fields. Him, the quarterback, I feel like what the biggest thing is I learned from these interviews is I think Justin Fields, the quarterback, has what it takes in the same way that Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. What I am still not sure about is if the Chicago Bears can put him in that position the way the Buffalo Bills did with Josh Allen, the way the Cincinnati Bengals did with Joe Burrow, and the same way that the Los Angeles Chargers did with Justin Herbert. I think that's the big question and continues to be about this franchise.
And that's a great point, because nothing seems to align. But let's end on a positive note.
Have we gotten the quarterback situation completely right? No. Have we won enough games? No. Everything else is there.
That's not positive. Come on, Ted.
Ted doesn't talk anymore. He's out.
Have you seen Ted? I haven't seen Ted at all.
I've not seen Ted at all.
He's hanging out in Arlington Heights.
I do think that with Luke Getsy and specifically Matt Eberflus, that there is a plan in place for Justin Fields, and they're going to stick with it, not only for this entire season, but for the entire duration of next season too. Have patience, everyone.
Yeah. And maybe it'll be the right plan. It is a plan, which I don't know the Bears have always had a plan, but this seems like a plan. I like it. Okay.
Plan.
The plan. Follow us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns. We will have all the coverage you need from the preseason game Saturday. A lot of people were guessing that maybe Nate Tice was going to be on this episode. He'll be with us early next week. So he was out of practice. A lot of people want to hear from him. He's still going to tell us what he saw at practice, but we also thought it'd be a good idea to let him watch the first preseason game too. And I think it's going to be really good. So Nate Tice will join us early next week.
Quick tease on that. He's been out to some other extensions of the Shanahan-McVay tree, so he could tell us exactly what's going on here with the Bears.
Yes. And he's seen a lot of these other young quarterbacks from Justin Fields' quarterback class, including one I know that he is kind of bailing on. Little teaser. So, and it's not Justin Fields, because you guys know how Nate Tice feels about Justin Fields. So we got that coming for you. A lot of good coverage. Make sure you're following us on The Athletic. Johnsy's on The Athletic, theathletic.com/Hoge Jahns, CHGO for me. A lot of good stuff here. Hope you enjoyed it, and talk to you next time.
See ya.